China's new Defense Minister Dong Jun has made his global debut here at the Shangri-La Dialogue Defense Conference in Singapore with a speech that turned fiery at times highlighting China's anger towards the United States as the contest between the two superpowers heats up, particularly, of course, here in Asia. To talk about this, we're joined by Zhou Bo. He's a retired senior colonel in the Chinese military. He's also part of the official Chinese delegation here and is a veteran of this kind of international conference. So, Zhou Bo, thank you very much for speaking to DW. So, there was a lot of criticism of the US in Minister Dong's speech. Can you explain, let's go back to sort of first principle, is China's issue with the United States' behavior in Asia?
I think China has tried its best to maintain a good relationship with the United States. That's why we always insist that this relationship should be one of cooperation. But the United States would insist that this is the one of competition. And Joe Biden even once described it as extreme competition. So therefore, China has to take a deep breath, to embrace this kind of rivalry, which is not something that China really looks forward. But so as a result, this kind of competition has actually intensified, and we have to, just be prepared for it. And right now, you are seeing in the Asia Pacific, U.S. trying to rally its allies, be it Japan, Australia, and the Philippines, to gun up against China. It's fair to say that Americans' Indo-Pacific policy is not entirely about containment of China, but the containment of China is definitely one of the goals of this grand strategy. The question is how successful the United States can be.
Mm-hmm. So we can talk about this idea of containment, which is certainly the Chinese perspective on what the United States is doing at the moment, but just with respect to the communication between the two sides. So we're looking back over a year when early last year the communication broke down completely. Many viewers will remember that there was an alleged spy balloon from China that flew over the United States. The United States shot it down, and that broke the rhythm of dialogue that had been just beginning around that time. Things are now just beginning again. The two defense ministers met here in Singapore for the first time since that had happened. Describe to me the importance of this kind of dialogue on this military level.
I think this kind of dialogue is extremely important. If we look at the Cold War, we would find that in spite of this total hostile relationship, the U.S. leaders and the Soviet leaders still managed to talk to one another, and in Ronald Reagan's words, is trust but verify. So that's why we have seen a lot of the competence building measures, especially nuclear fields. But sadly, it's not quite the case between China and the United States. I think one of the reasons is that because the military strength of the two countries is not really a kind of equilibrium, because if your strength is more or less the same, so each side would believe that he can afford to talk. So this is not quite the case between China and the U.S. So talking about the so-called guardrails, which are called upon by the United States, China, generally speaking, agreed to this because none of us wants a conflict. So China also talked about conflict building measures. So, but I believe this kind of guardrails essentially difficult to establish, because of this kind of disparity in strength. Because if you have this kind of disparity in strength, normally the strong one want to free the status quo to maintain its advantage. So that is why you would not find this kind of a talk so easy to be done, even if everybody talks about importance of talks.
And so this may have been one factor in the fact that China broke off this kind of dialogue after many viewers may remember that the US then Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, visited Taiwan, which was considered by China to be a breach of America's commitments with respect to Taiwan. After that, it then severed those kinds of dialogue. That was partly kind of punishment for the Pelosi visit, but from your point of view, there was a skepticism within China about this kind of dialogue then.
Oh yeah, you are talking about the political aspect of such kind of a military relationship, right? Just now I was talking about the military balance, but right now you are talking about an issue which actually could be more important. That is the political influence of a military relationship. Nancy Pelosi's visit did tremendous damage to China-US relationship. And we in China are not so naive to believe that Joe Biden could not give her a call to stop this visit. Yeah, so we won't buy this kind of, a balance of power among, three branches.
Although, of course, the Americans would dispute that. But we're talking about pretty sort of ancient history at that point. We're now in 2024. The two defense ministers have had their talks. And yet the speeches that we saw, Lloyd Austin for the Americans and Dong Jun for the Chinese, both really set out their vision of what's going on in Asia. What you described is what China views as a kind of containment, an encirclement of China, with the United States building up its alliances with countries such as Japan, the Philippines, and so on. From the United States point of view, they are simply supporting allies which are concerned about China having the aspirations of hegemony within the region. So what do you say to that?
I don't think so. I read the Americans' strategic report published in 2018. One thing that really impressed me is that it claims that China wants to drive the United States out of the Indo-Pacific. The United States is a country in the Indo-Pacific. How can we drive Americans out of their own home? It's simply impossible, right? And if we are threatening the neighbors, just to give us some evidence, we're not, talking about attacking Japan. We're not talking about attacking Australia. With the Philippines, yes, we have some problems, but we have never threatened the use of force against them. On Taiwan issue, actually, there are three conditions in which we might apply non-peaceful means. Yeah, but with any ASEAN countries, we have never threatened use force.
But what we've been seeing happening recently is there have been sort of showdowns between Chinese and Filipino vessels near what's called the Second Thomas Shoal, where Chinese vessels have used water cannon and other devices to repel Philippines vessels. Now, Defense Minister Dong was asked a question after his speech by one of the delegates, but he didn't come to the point of answering it. So I'm curious to get your take. Is there any chance that the Chinese military is going to stop using these kind of tactics, using water cannons, because it is evidently coming at a cost of reputation to China? We saw in the hall there that there does seem to be some solidarity with the Philippines facing this use of water cannon and laser and other devices.
Well, first of all, this is not Chinese PLA who have used the water cannon. It's the Chinese Coast Guard. Yeah.
But does that make any difference? I mean, this is still an official.
There is a difference because Chinese Coast Guard should be, less armed than the PLA. So that is why we didn't use the PLA, trying to stop them. The point is, using water cannon, of course, might just be impressive on TV screens, but it's a kind of a deterrence. Because it's not about shooting anyone. Why all of a sudden this kind of things suddenly become a kind of incident, not a thing in the past? Because I believe the rusted leadership is no longer sustainable. So they decided to carry some, building materials to have it fortified, to turn it into kind of a permanent base. And this is not what we want to see. And this is also in violation of their own promise, which they did in 1999.
So you're referring to an old Filipino ship that is run aground in that area. But the criticism of China goes, and it's not just from the Philippines, it's also from many countries in that region, that China has extraordinarily expansive claims within the South China Sea. China essentially claims virtually the entire South China Sea, going very, very far south from Chinese territory, including various shoals, reefs, and other features, some of which have been now built up and militarized in the last 10 or 15 years. An international tribunal has ruled that there is no basis to these claims. On what basis does China still hold on to these claims, or is there any chance that it will pull back from them?
Well, first of all, China did not claim the whole South China Sea because the Chinese stand is that the islands and the rocks belong to China, and these islands and rocks would have a 12 nautical miles territorial water, so on and so forth, and the international ships and aircraft could enjoy freedom of navigation. So this is China's position.
Yeah, but if you still look at a map of the South China Sea, it's essentially what is called the 9- or now 10- line. It extends right to the bottom of it and right around.
Yeah. But we did not say that the 9-9 just means everything within. It is just the Chinese water, Chinese territory. So we have made it clear that only the rocks and the islands are Chinese. All of them are Chinese, territory, and they have the legitimate rights extended according to.
And this is disputed.
Yeah, this is disputed. Yes, correct. This is disputed, and that is why we and ASEAN countries are talking about code of conduct. With a name to resolve this issue. This kind of COC, code of conduct, actually is not so easy because it's not that it is between China and the ASEAN countries who have different views. It is also found among ASEAN countries themselves how to agree about themselves. When it comes to South China Sea issue, people always have the impression that this is the issue between China and ASEAN, or even at least some ASEAN claimants. It's not true. Actually, many of these ASEAN countries have overlapping claims. And this is true, but this is seldom heard. Yeah, when it comes to China, everybody talks about this South China. Everybody talking about China versus ASEAN, which is not true.
But I think that is quite natural, given the case that China is by far the largest power in the region and has by far also the largest claim. I mean, you talk about the differences between the countries. At the moment, the focus is very much on the Philippines because the Philippines is strengthening its alliance with the United States, seeking help in this dispute with China. But if you talk to another country such as Indonesia, we were talking to an Indonesian delegate here, they also refer to the overlapping claims that exist at the very fringes of the South China Sea, where China claims part of what is Indonesia's exclusive economic zone, as it's called. And prompted by this, even Indonesia, which is a non-aligned country with a proud long history of having a completely independent foreign policy, has been stepping up its participation in military exercises with the United States. So my question would be, do you see concern that because of this behavior by China that is seen by countries, even neutral ones like Indonesia, as provocative, and with excessive claims, that is driving them into the hands of the United States, a power that you would prefer not to see so active in that region?
No, I don't think so, because the truth is ASEAN countries would stress upon so-called ASEAN centrality, because that gives them self-importance. But ASEAN countries definitely do not want to become, the homeland to become a central battlefield. That is, they do not want to see a conflict between China and the U.S. So this kind of behavior by the Philippines actually did not win much sympathy. Among ASEAN countries. In fact, it's the other way around. Because if Philippines keep on provoking China, as our Defense Minister Dong Jun said, China's patience has a limit. So should there be a war which will involve the United States, then the worst nightmare will be realized. So this is not something all other ASEAN countries want to see. Actually, let me tell you, according to a recent poll by Yusof Institute of Singapore National University, China actually is becoming more popular than the United States in this region, according to the latest poll.
Well, I think there are all sorts of competing polls. I don't know the poll you're referring to, so let's not go into that. But certainly speaking to delegates here, I think there's a range of views. Certainly it's true that many are very concerned about a kind of new Cold War scenario here, but they are also concerned about one country being too dominant. But you refer to the risk of conflict with the Philippines at this flashpoint. Dong Jun, as you mentioned, the defense minister did make a veiled threat that China's patience will only go so far, or that its restraint will only last so far. How close do you think conflict is?
I don't believe it is very likely, but the likelihood is not zero. Why? Because we have overwhelming, military strength, and we actually have made it clear that they could continue to provide, food supply and water, etc., to those mariners on board the ship. So we're not going to use force against these mariners on board the ship, but we would stop them, from providing the building materials, trying to fortify the ship. So given the overwhelming military strength, I don't believe that we need to use force unless they become too provocative. So that gives a lot of imagination as to how provocative they can be. Yeah, but I believe the Chinese position is very much clear.
Yeah, but just to stress, I mean, the Philippines would say that the provocations are coming from the other side. So, of course, I mean, it's natural in disputes that both sides accuse each other of being responsible. But I think there are some in the region who would refer to what you talk about there as China not wanting any building to take place on this or that shoal or this or that location. That this is exactly what China has done in the last 10, 15, 20 years, is building on these remote shoals in the South China Sea to establish a kind of fait accompli of a greater military presence there. Do you think there is any, or can you understand those accusations of hypocrisy coming from some in the region?
I think there is a misunderstanding, really, because the Western media would describe those islands as artificial islands, right? Yeah, and artificial islands means, okay, they actually came out of the land reclamation, but it's not the case, because all these islands and rocks have the old names. So as I said, in Shangri-La Dialogue many years ago, if they are just artificial islands, where do the names come from?
Yeah, but still, this is building up features.
This is
the
extension of the existing maritime features. Yeah.
But I think essentially what we're potentially getting there into is sort of legalistic views of what is or what is not what degree of maritime feature. But the fact is that the tribunal that ruled on this dispute found against China. China says repeatedly that it stands up for international law. How do these things fit together? The tribunal ruled that these against China, and yet China sticks by these claims.
No, it's very simple, because the ruling supposedly should not happen at all. Why? Because China actually have made a declaration as early as 2006, telling the world that we will not accept any ruling when it comes to territory and so on and so forth. Philippines only sued China in 2013. That means when we made the declaration in 2006, we actually don't know that the Philippines was about to sue us later. The whole UN Convention Law of the Sea is not about a sovereignty issue. Yeah. So therefore, making use of UNCLOS to solve this kind of a territorial issue is not its authority.
But it does sound like might makes right, that if we just say we wouldn't abide by something, if we just do it, then it's ours. I mean, this is what it can come across like.
No, because we have made a declaration even before the ruling, and we do not know that many years later there was about a ruling. And we talked about specifically Article 298. The interesting is, not only China has reservation about this article. Countries like India, many other countries have a same reservation for the same article. So China is not the only country that has a reservation for this article.
Now let's just move on finally. I would like to talk about the Ukraine crisis and the Russian war which is ongoing there. Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, made a surprise appearance here at the Shangri-La Dialogue. He came trying to drum up support for his position and also for the peace conference that's coming soon. He was unusually critical of China. He's tended not to be publicly critical of China, the thought being that he doesn't want to alienate China. This time he has criticized China for providing support to Russia, not necessarily weapons, but other forms of economic, political, diplomatic support and potentially dual-use goods as well. How do you think that will be seen by the Chinese government, this criticism now coming from Zelensky?
Well, I think the Chinese government has made it quite clear that we would not attend this peace summit. Yeah, because we believe that to resolve this crisis or the conflict, you have to involve the warring parties. So Russia has turned it down, and just by inviting other countries to attend without the major warring party, I think it looks more like a PR effort. And in this regard, it becomes one-sided. So I think the Chinese government's position would make sense, even if that makes President Lai Ching-te extremely uncomfortable. So I believe he was disappointed. So he said something that he'd never talked about in the past.
Mm-hmm. And he's accused China of trying to encourage other countries also not to take part. Do you think that's what's your response to this accusation?
China would not participate, but China would not, try to dissuade other countries from attending. Maybe Russia might do that. So China certainly would not want to do that. And why should China do that?
Now, I mean, just kind of moving to the end of our conversation, we've had communication re-established between the US and China on multiple levels, now on the defense minister level. We've seen and we've gone through a lot of the arguments between the two sides. What you hear almost from everybody, it doesn't matter what their position is in this region, they want China and the United States to be able to manage their differences without this tipping over into conflict. This is also common ground expressed by the two leaderships, maybe in different ways at least, but neither side says, yes, we want war. How do you leave Singapore after this conference? Do you feel that some progress has been made?
Yeah, I actually feel somewhat relieved. Yeah, not only myself, I believe everybody feels the same thing, because China and the United States are the two largest economies, and this kind of rivalry between two titans would make everybody feel intense. So just to see them talking to one another, yeah, would be a huge relief for everybody. So now as we're talking to each other, people know, okay, these two guys are not at least preparing for fighting against each other. So this is at least a kind of temporary relief. So I believe this meeting is better than I thought.
And to pick up finally on one comment that Dong Jun made in his speech, which was when he was discussing Taiwan, there's been a recent change of leadership in Taiwan. He used pretty drastic language towards the new leader, William Lai, the new president in Taiwan, saying that accusing him, which is something that China's done before, of being a separatist, and saying that he would be nailed to the wall of history. Why would a Chinese minister in a situation like this, where it's a diplomatic conference, use such language which has such a kind of a threatening undertone to it? This visual of nailing somebody to the wall.
Because that is kind of a traditional Chinese language, which I can recite very easily. Nail someone on the column of shame of history. So that is a kind of a traditional Chinese way to express politically against someone that people really, really hate. Yeah. So this might sound somewhat interesting or impressive to you, but this is a kind of a traditional Chinese way of describing how they feel.
But there is a deep antipathy towards William Lai in China. There's a deep skepticism about his motivations.
Yeah, that's true, because I myself feel surprised after I read his speech, because even compared to his predecessor, who is, considered a recessionist, but he even would go much further, and this in fact demonstrated he's indeed a man who had described himself as a pragmatic Taiwanese independence worker. So this is, and he described, this kind of relationship between the two sides across strait as not, interrelated. This is clearly a kind of separatist remarks, which we definitely would not tolerate. So about Taiwan issue, I think there are two facts. One is time is really on the side of mainland China, and the second thing is Taiwan would not move away. So each one of these provocations would have to create a new kind of a status quo, which would become irreversible, which would sharply, actually squeeze Taiwan's space.
I think the Taiwanese government would emphasize that the comments that William Lai made were very much in line with things that he said in the past, and the one comment about being a pragmatic worker towards Taiwan independence is a comment that is made some years ago and is not seen as current policy. But let's just leave it there, Zhou Bo. There are so many issues to talk about, but thank you very much for going through some of them with me here today.
Thank you.